Hello, mi gente, and welcome to Spanglish. What a week. It's been about maybe 12 days, I don't know. Sorry that I've been gone too long, but I'm back. Before I get into today's topic, I want to talk about a little bit of what's going on. I mean, there's a lot going on. Let's talk about Jared Kushner. First of all, they finally downgraded his security clearance, and we also found out that at least 4 foreign government officials wanted to manipulate him. They were noticed that he was weak in certain areas, he had no experience in foreign relations, that he was massively in debt, and that he kind of circumvented the rules, which is, of course, not good for the country's sake. But it is good for Jared because we found out that he had meetings with certain companies in the White House after he was given that position, and those companies lent him and his family's company $400 million. So he's in debt to those people. It makes you think about pay for play. I don't know if this is illegal, but it's definitely highly unethical. Not only should he not have the security clearance he had, but he should be fired like yesterday. And I hope somebody in the White House does it. I know Trump's not going to do it, but I hope enough pressure is added that he will be forced to do it like he has done stuff in the past. But yeah, the corruption in this White House goes beyond all levels. It's ridiculous. And of course, Hope Hicks resigned a day after she got grilled by the House Intelligence Committee. And she said that she had been planning to do this for a while now. She wanted to pursue better opportunities. I mean, you're working at the White House. I mean, in a real White House, there will be no better opportunity, I think, to serve your country. In this particular White House, I mean, it makes sense, but I thought she was a true believer. She's the longest serving aide that Donald Trump had. And that's not saying much because nobody lasts very long at the White House. Either they get fired because of some scandal like Rob Porter, or they resign, or there's either forced out like Omarosa. The list goes on. The incompetence and the corruption in this White House, it knows no bounds. And the fact that a lot of conservatives are so quiet about this stuff, it is so telling how partisan this whole thing has become. And let's not forget to mention that when Trump found out that the Chinese president was essentially appointed president for life, he said, hey, maybe we should try that over here. You know, maybe he was kidding, but coming from a guy who has all this appreciation and this love for autocrats and dictators, it's a little troublesome. And can you imagine Obama saying that? Even if Obama said it like at an open mic and clearly it was a joke, man, Fox News will go crazy. It will go crazy. And I assure you that they're not saying anything about Trump making that quote-unquote joke. But Mr. President, we tried a leader for life here in this country. It was King George, and it didn't work out for him quite well. So I wouldn't go down that route if I were you. Do not test the American spirit of independence. Now, what I really want to talk about is the relationship between Cubans and the Republican Party. Last year, Trump told the Mexican president that in the last election, he won with a large percentage of Hispanic voters. He said, I don't know if you heard, but with Cuba, I had 84% with the Cuban-American vote. Okay, first of all, that's a lie. He didn't have 84% of the Cuban-American vote. And do you think that Cubans and Mexicans are part of the same countries? I don't understand. Why would the president of Mexico care what Cuban-Americans do? Besides the fact they're Latinos, there's no connection there. Yeah. But yeah, it's a lie. He did win the Cuban-American vote, but it was around 50 to maybe 58%, which is still a lot. Most of the Latinos vote heavily Democrat. I mean, it's not even close. So why is that? Why do Cubans historically vote Republicans? And not all Cubans, of course. Like I said, it's 50%, maybe a little over 50%. That's a lot of people. And that's a really stark contrast from any other Latino demographics, really. But if you want to understand where this comes from, you got to go back in time. Not too far back. Let's give it in the 20th century.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
So in 1961, Cubans trained by the CIA attacked the Castro government with the full promise of aerial support from JFK. The invaders were waiting for pivotal air support, but it never came. JFK didn't follow through with his promise. As a result, 120 of the Cuban-Americans who invaded the country died, and over 1,200 were captured. Now, Fidel had come into power 2 years previously, by a coup. So his fresh government was still new, and JFK, of course, was a Democrat. He promised the Cubans, hey, just go in there, we're going to back you up, we got air support, and you guys going to take Cuba back. Well, he didn't. He betrayed Cubans. And that was the beginning. And that's probably the one that stung the most, to be honest. And I'm talking about the first generation of Cubans who left the island. And I'll talk about that later, but there's a shift recently, especially the younger generations of Cubans don't really vote Republican anymore. But there's a strong majority of older Cubans who, as you know, a lot of the older people are the ones that vote most of the time. They're still strongly Republican because of this event that happened 50 years ago. This first generation of Cubans are single issue voters, and their only issue is Cuba. And a lot of Cubans feel that way. Then came another test. In 1980, while Jimmy Carter was president, again, another Democrat, 10,000 Cubans stormed the Peruvian embassy in Havana. It was insane, it was chaotic, and the main reason the Cubans stormed the embassy was because the island was under dire economic situations. Kind of like what I talked about in 94 in one of our previous episodes when I talk about my story. But anyway, so what did the Cuban government do? Well, they said that anyone who wanted to leave Cuba would leave. And this became known as the Mariel boat lift. Now, Cubans in Florida, the Cuban-Americans, they used their boats to pick up their families. At least that was a deal between the Cubans and the Castro government. But of course, you cannot trust Castro. So I personally have family that they left Cuba this way. They had somebody from here, from the US, from Miami, go pick them up. And once they got to the port in their boat, in their personal boat, there were a bunch of strangers, and the Cuban government said, you can take one family member, and the rest, you get to fill your boat with these people. And if you complain, you said no, you get turned back around. So you can pick one person to leave or nobody. Of course, it's a horrible decision. Entire families were broken apart. Some of the families said, no, we're not leaving without my sister or my daughter or my mom. Again, it was horrible. And it turns out that these strangers that the government filled boats with, where they went ahead and they emptied out mental health facilities and jails. They found that the most hardened criminals and the most mentally insane and dangerous people in the asylums, and they told them to leave the island in a boat or to stay in there forever. So what they did, a lot of them either were forced to the boats or they were given the option that really they were not going to refuse, which is horrible. Of course, that brought a lot of crime to Miami, into the U.S. And what did Carter do in retaliation? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is basically an act of war. This was supposed to be a way for families to get reunified. Instead, the Cuban government used it to send criminals to the U.S. instead of families, and Carter did nothing. And then in 1994, like I mentioned in one of my earlier episodes, the one titled My Story, there was a similar situation where Cubans were fed up, hundreds gathered in the coast, and they were demanding for freedoms. They wanted to just have the ability to have free elections. Well, Fidel didn't like the idea, so he did the same thing. He opened the borders. He said anybody who wants to leave can leave. And they did. And a lot of people left Cuba. And that's how I came to this country. Not through a boat, but due to this whole negotiations that happened in the following year. If you haven't heard the episode, please go back and listen to it. This is basically an act of war. It's an influx of people, of massive amount of people coming at the same time to another country, deliberately by the other government. And who was president in 1994? Well, Bill Clinton was president. Yes, a Democrat. You're getting the idea here. Then, in 2016, Obama landed in Cuba. Here's the thing. In almost 60 years, Fidel Castro hadn't done anything and hasn't done anything, well, his brother hasn't now that Fidel's dead, to improve the lives of Cubans. Literally, as Obama's plane was landing, Cubans peacefully protesting the Cuban government were beaten and arrested. There's images, there's reports about that. Talk about a slap to the face. Opposition leaders were watched in their houses, make sure they didn't leave, and the ones that did manage to leave were arrested. It was horrible. I mean, how can the leader of the greatest democracy in the world make this kind of deal with a horrible government without getting any promises in return? There were no promises of free elections, no promises of recognizing the opposition party, nothing. If you can't tell, I'm not a fan of this Obama policy. I think Obama's a great president, but I'm not a blind follower of anybody. I really think this policy meant more about himself, about his legacy, than it meant for the Cuban people. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in the future, history will prove me wrong. Maybe this is a first step to opening relations. But I feel like all this did was give Castro more money for nothing in return. Like, absolutely nothing. Obama became the first U.S. president in 90 years to visit Cuban soil. And again, it felt like it's more about himself, about his legacy, about being that historical president in his final year than about anything else. Because no Cubans have benefited from that. Not in the island, really. Not directly, at least. Because the government, again, owns everything and they control everything. There's no freedoms. There's nothing. Now, like I said, maybe history will prove me wrong. Maybe Obama saw something that I didn't, that I still don't see.
I am announcing today a new policy, just as I promised during the campaign. And I will be signing that contract right at that table in just a moment. Our policy will seek a much better deal for the Cuban people and for the United States of America. We do not want U.S. dollars to prop up a military monopoly that exploits and abuses the citizens of Cuba. Our new policy begins with strictly enforcing U.S. law. We will not lift sanctions on the Cuban regime until all political prisoners are freed. Freedoms of assembly and expression are respected.
And this is the only thing that I can say that I agree on Trump with. And Trump is not doing this because he cares about Cubans. He's doing it because he needs votes. He needs a Hispanic vote. And he knows that he peddles this thing about being tough on Cuba, on Castro. He knows that he will win Florida because Cubans are very active politically, especially when it comes to the Cuban issue. So all this to say that the older Cubans, the older generation, are single voter issues, and the only issue they care about is Cuba. Even if they've been here for 50 years, they don't care about anything else. They care about Cuba. Now, Cuba matters to me a lot, but I live here now. I'm also an American citizen, and there's no way in hell I would have voted for Trump. 54% of Cubans did, but that generation is dying out, literally. I mean, they're getting older. The younger generation of Cubans is more aligned now with the Democratic Party. There's a shift happening. And honestly, no one else exemplifies this better than Emma Gonzalez.
Politicians who sit in their gilded House and Senate seats funded by the NRA telling us nothing could have ever been done to prevent this, we call BS!
Yes, the Emma Gonzalez. Her dad is Cuban and she identifies herself as Cuban. So there's hope. There's hope for the next generation of Cubans to see that the Republican Party is becoming obsolete because of their own doing. It's just interesting. I've been thinking about this, and the Republicans say, well, the Democrats want all these legal immigrants to become legals, blah, blah, so they can have voters. Well, if you're so concerned about that, then why don't you be more supportive of immigration, of immigrants? And then maybe, just maybe, by showing love, by showing compassion, by showing understanding, they'll be like, hey, you know what? Maybe they're not so bad. Maybe we can vote for a Republican who aligns with these issues. But no, instead of thinking that way, they're thinking, we don't want more immigrants here because they're going to vote Democrats. Well, guess what? We're going to keep having immigrants here. You're not going to stop people from coming to this country. So instead of making it harder for them, how about you find a solution that makes it easy for everybody else, and your party won't become obsolete in the next 5 or 10 years. You may have power for now, but your power is going to be eliminated, really. Unless a centrist Republican Party emerges out of this chaos from the Trump world that we have right now, this party will be dead in the next 10 years or less. All this to say that historically, Cubans have been aligned with the Republican Party, but that's changing, and that's a good thing. And I think it's time that us Cubans unite with our fellow or Latino, Latinx people in this country and fight for our rights collectively. No matter what our status is, we need to fight together, because there are people out there, people in power, who when they look at us, they don't see Cuban, they don't see Mexican, they don't see Puerto Rican, they don't see Nicaraguan, they see just second-class citizen. And that's not right. And we have to fight for our rights. We got to protect the dreamers. We got to find a way to legalize a lot of people who have been here for 30 years working every single day for a better life for the families. We need to unite, and we need to do it now. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you guys next time. And please rate and share this podcast. Share it with your friends. Rate it on iTunes. Give it 5 stars if you can. And that will help me out a lot. Thank you, guys. See you soon.